Hi, my name is Courtney. I am the Director of Tapestries here at United Methodist Communities at Pittman. Tapestries is our memory support community. I am a social worker by background, and I have a lot of years of experience in senior and dementia care, traumatic brain injury, education, and mental health. So basically, just a lot of things brain related, as well as some both personal and professional experience with dementia. I'm very passionate about this field, and so I hope to be able to pass that passion on to you in a way that makes it easier for you to understand and support your loved ones with dementia through that process. Um, I do apologize. Typically, these meetings are held live so that you can participate and ask questions and get feedback as to better ways to help support your loved one. I am out on maternity leave right now, and so I'm very fortunate to be able to pre-record the meetings so that I can still provide this support, but unfortunately can't respond in real time to your questions. But there is some contact information at the end for where you can get those questions answered and get any additional support you may need in my absence in the meantime. And also to that effect, please bear with me through the presentation. I do have two children sitting under my lungs. And so I may be a little short of breath at times. So I appreciate your patience as we go through. Um, so that said, today we are talking about promoting independence through environmental safety. So this is just a really fancy way of saying, like, how do we make your loved one's home safer so that they can continue to be comfortable and happy there for as long as possible? And how do we do that in a way that's not invasive? So, like we're not baby proofing everything and covering all of the corners with foam and stuff like that, where we're going to make them feel embarrassed or feel like children, but some easy to make, adjustments just to make things a little bit safer for them. And so when we think about dementia and its impact on safety awareness, sometimes it can seem like our loved ones just get a little careless. But we want to make sure that we're aware of what's really happening here. It's not that they don't care. It's not that they're not paying attention. It's a change in their symptoms that impact their ability to be safety aware. And so some of those changes that we see that affect it are judgment. So changes in their ability to determine what is or is not safe. Limited awareness of changes in their own ability. So it might be that they don't recognize that turning on the stove is a danger anymore because they don't realize that they might forget to turn it back off. They may not realize, that they haven't cooked in years. And so they think in that moment that they're still able to. This is especially true with driving. If your loved one is still in the community and has access to a car and to car keys, even if they haven't driven in a decade, they may occasionally forget that fact and want to go for a drive and insist that they are capable when we really know that they're not. We might see memory issues, forgetting how to use things safely or forgetting that they've recently used something. Again, if they forget they turned the stove on, forget they turned the sink on and walk away from it, get started doing something else. And then, what happens when the sink overflows? Complex attention. So this is our ability to do complicated tasks and our ability to focus on one task when there are distractions. And so this might be that they have a hard time remembering the steps of something in order to execute it safely. Again, whether that's cooking, whether that's using their curling iron and remembering that they're not supposed to touch the barrel or that they need to turn it off when they're done. Or it might be, doing those things while the television is on and maybe they get distracted by The Price is Right and walk away, kind of a thing. Sense of time and place. So sometimes they can become confused even in familiar places, and that can impact their safety. And sometimes, especially where like medications and things like that are concerned, they might lose track of what time of day it is. And so, especially if they're in control of their own medications, have they taken their morning meds already? And then at 3 o'clock in the morning, they're insistent that or 3 o'clock in the afternoon, rather, they insist they just woke up for the day and it's morning and they want to take them again. And is that a problem? We might see behavioral changes. So sometimes we see for people with dementia that they develop routines or patterns of behavior. Some even develop compulsive behaviors, like things that they just have to do repetitively. Stuff like rummaging through certain drawers, fixating on mail or paperwork, that sort of thing. Where rummaging through the drawer may not be an issue unless the drawer contains, scissors and knives, kind of a thing. So stuff we want to consider. Sensory changes. So they might have changes in their vision, in their hearing, and in their depth perception, and their temperature sensitivity that can all lead to safety concerns. If they can't see very well to determine that gas stove is still lit, if they can't hear the sound of the smoke detector going off, if they can't see quite how far away that table is, and then they walk into it and trip over it, that sort of thing. If they can't tell, if they feel cold all the time, even though it's 85 degrees outside, they're more prone to dehydration, to heat stroke, to things like that, so definitely some safety concerns there. And physical ability, changes in their strength and balance, their endurance. So maybe they used to easily be able to navigate the walk from the bedroom to the kitchen and back, but now they can't because it's a long walk, or because their balance is off and they're playing ping pong off the walls that whole time. Things like that. And does that put them at increased risk for falls and injuries? So all things that we want to change, or that we want to make changes to help address. And we want to make sure that those changes are made with a focus on dignity and on engagement. Again, we're not baby proofing. They are not babies. They are not children. And we want to make sure that we're not making safety changes that are taking things from their lives whenever possible. We want to keep them engaged. That's going to keep their brains good and healthy for as long as possible. So, two of the most dangerous rooms in the house, the kitchen and the bathroom. And so when we think about some changes that we can make to the kitchen and the bathroom, we want to make sure that we're using low flow faucets. So the energy efficient kind, the water saving kind, and that our overflow valves are clear. We may even want to take the stoppers out of the sink. If we're taking the stoppers out of the sink, we want to make sure we have like the mesh inserts or something to help catch things, but something that's going to let water flow freely. We do see a lot of our residents that'll turn on the water and then forget that they've left it on and walk away from it. And the number of bathroom and kitchen floods that we've had is just, truly overwhelming. And you want to prevent that water damage and prevent the hazards that come with it. If they leave the sink running and then later walk into the bathroom and don't realize there's a puddle on the floor and slip and fall and hit their head, that's a problem. So low flow faucets and clear overflow valves or clear drains are going to reduce the risk that if they leave the water on, it overflows. We want to make sure that we regulate the water heater temperature. Again, temperature sensitivity is a big thing. And so if the water heater is set to 140, and that means if they turn the faucet on all the way on hot, they're likely to scald themselves. We might want to turn it down to like a 120 where it's a little safer. They're less likely to get burns or unintended injuries if the water's too hot. We want to make sure that we use appliances with automatic shutoff timers. These are, our coffee pots, our curling irons, everything in between. Anything with an automatic shutoff is going to decrease the chances that our loved one leaves it turned on, has that heating element active, potentially starts a fire, or potentially just comes in contact with it later, thinking that it's turned off and then burns themselves. We also want to make sure that those things are plugged in as far away from a source of water as possible. Realistically, I've seen, ladies leave their curling irons on and plugged in very close to the edge of the sink. And if they leave the sink running and that curling iron slips into the sink, there's risk of electric shock. So we want to keep them as far away as possible. Stove and oven safeguards. So you may want to disconnect the stove from the gas line. You may want to unplug it if it's an electric stove so that they're not able to use it. You may want to get those knob covers that make it so that they can't turn the oven knobs on if they're not able to cook safely. Or you may want to just, make adjustments to, if your loved one is still able to cook safely but needs a lot of reminders, maybe you're posting big colorful signs, so that they have prompts to remember to use it safely. That's going to depend on who your loved one is and where they are in their dementia process. But we definitely want to put those safeguards in place. We want to do regular food safety checks. And so when I say food safety checks, you want to make sure that the refrigerator and the freezer are plugged in. We have a lot of chronic unpluggers. And the number of times we've gone into a room and been like, ooh, smells kind of funny in here. And come to find out that the resident has unplugged their refrigerator while there's a gallon of milk inside is really unpleasant. And it happens pretty frequently. And we don't want them drinking that milk and getting sick. So you want to make sure you're checking that the fridge and freezer are unplugged frequently, that they're closing the doors fully and tightly, because again, even if they're leaving the refrigerator door open, that's still allowing for food to thaw, to, spoil, to overheat. That might be bad. We want to make sure that we are checking expiration dates and throwing food away when it's gone bad, especially leftovers, things like that. And we might want to be mindful of what we're wrapping leftovers in. If your loved one is comfortable and safe using the microwave, but we're wrapping our leftovers in aluminum foil, they may forget to take aluminum foil off, and putting that aluminum foil in the microwave is going to start a fire. Might want to lean towards, like microwave safe containers, or, cling wrap, things like that, to wrap our food instead. So we're less likely to have our loved one start a fire in the microwave if they, skip that step in the process of heating up their food. We want to remove items that might be mistaken for food or drink. So these are your decorative fruits. If you have those like wax apples in a bowl on the table kind of a thing. Candles that look like food and drinks have become very popular recently. We probably want to remove those. Unfortunately, we have seen residents who do try to eat them. Non-food items that are stored in food containers. So we do a lot of craft activities. A common thing is like, oh, just grab a water glass and use that for your paintbrush water. If your loved one comes along and thinks that's grape juice and drinks it, hopefully you're using non-toxic paint, so it's not something to worry about. But if the food container, or if the container that something is in signifies food, the brain is thinking that's food or that's a beverage, they might consume it, and it may be something that's not safe for them to consume. So we definitely want to be mindful of that. And especially in the bathroom, we want to install grab bars and non-slip stickers on the tub floor. And we may want to consider a shower chair, a bath chair, and a major upgrade. If you're financially able, you may want to consider getting a walk-in shower or a walk-in tub, as opposed to one that has a lip or a high wall, just to make our loved one less likely to trip and fall trying to get in and out of that shower. So bedroom safety, we want to be mindful of any heating elements that our loved one might use in the bedroom, whether that's a space heater, a heating pad, an electric blanket. Again, they don't have great temperature sensitivity. Sometimes they're always cold, and so there might be a tendency to turn those items up too high. Space heaters might be too close to the bed, which is a fire hazard. Heating pads or electric blankets should have timers on them so they're not remaining on all night, which might cause your loved one to, get a burn or injury, might cause them to dehydrate, which can have its own complications. Heat exhaustion, heat stroke, things like that. We want to make sure that their bedroom has a seating area for dressing. Sometimes we think, oh, our loved one just sits on the bed, but the bed tends to squish under our loved one's tushy when they sit on the edge. And especially when they pick up their feet to put on socks and shoes or to put their feet in pant legs, we see a lot of residents that just slip right off the bed onto the floor at those times, which increases odds of injury. So we want to make sure that there's like a legitimate seating area, even if it's just a chair where they can sit to put on their clothes and their shoes, so it's a little bit safer. We want to consider their bed height. And this is complicated and depends on your loved one's specific needs. If your loved one has bad knees, you might need the bed to be a little higher so that they can get in and out of it comfortably with less pain. If your loved one is prone to falls, and especially to falling out of bed, you might want the bed to be a little lower so that if they fall, they have less far to fall, which decreases their risk of injury. And we might want to consider things like enabler rails, which is a short handrail, not like a hospital rail that spans the entire length of the bed, but it's a short handrail that slides between the box spring and the mattress, that just gives them something to hold on to as they're getting into and out of bed so that they're better able to stabilize as they pull themselves up or down. And pool noodles are great, again, especially if your loved one does tend to sit on the edge of the bed and slip off from time to time, or does tend to fall out of bed. A pool noodle is a great dollar store intervention. You put it under the fitted sheet so that they can't see it, right at the edge of the bed, and it just gives a little extra lip, just a tiny one, to decrease the chances that they slide off of that edge. So that's certainly something you can try. I'm sure there are lots of other things, but that's something that's, cheap and easy to do that we've had a lot of success with. We want to make sure that we're clearing or lowering high shelves in the bedroom, in the closet, so that things are accessible. If your loved one keeps their shoes on a shelf and it's overhead and out of reach, are they climbing on something to get it? Are they standing on their tiptoes to try to reach that thing? Are they pulling that potentially heavy thing down on top of their head? All opportunities for injury. So lower those shelves. And similarly, we want to raise low shelves or raise items that they use a lot to waist height or to higher shelves, so that they're not bending over and looking under things and trying to find stuff low down, because when they bend over, sometimes they fall over. Or if they're reaching in areas they can't see, maybe they're getting down on all fours to see it better and then they can't get up, that kind of thing. So we want to keep things in a nice accessible range, somewhere between, hip height and chest height. Mobility and fall prevention. This is a big one. So as our loved one's balance gets worse, as their vision gets worse, and they're maybe less aware of things in their path, we want to make sure that we keep walkways wide and clear, especially if our loved one uses a walker, uses a wheelchair. Those pathways need to be extra wide and can't have any obstructions, because if they're pushing that walker or rolling that wheelchair into that obstruction, it's increasing the odds that they're going to tumble over or tumble out. We want to make sure that rooms are well lit. And we want to make sure, especially at night, if our loved one tends to get up a lot in the middle of the night, whether that's to go to the bathroom, whether that's to wander, whatever the case may be, that hallways, bedrooms, bathrooms are well lit with night lights. We don't want the light to impose on their sleep, but we do want to make sure they can see where they're going if they get up in the night, so that they're not walking into things. If wandering is a concern, we want to move locks to less visible and less accessible locations. So that might mean putting a deadbolt at the top of the door. or at the very bottom of the door, so that at night you are locking that deadbolt so that they can't get out that door, out of sight, out of mind. So if it's just the standard doorknob height lock and they decide they want to go for a stroll in the evening and they walk out the front door at 2 a.m, that's a problem. But if that deadbolt is very high on the door where they can't reach it, or very low where they can't reach it or they can't see it, they're less likely to be able to get out that door. They're going to stay in the house. They're going to be safer. And ideally, you want to make sure that you're locking those deadbolts when they're not looking, when they're not in the room, so that we're decreasing the odds they're going to see it and potentially remember it. Because realistically, sometimes the weirdest things stick in their memory, and it's always the stuff you don't want them to remember. So just an extra safeguard. We want to secure large furniture items. These are your bookshelves, your bureaus, even your televisions. Secure them to the surface that they're on, or secure them to the wall so that they're less likely to fall over. You might think your loved one is not going to try to move that piece of furniture. You might be wrong. I have seen residents move bookcases, large, heavy, full bookcases, as though it's nothing. They move our couches at least once a day, and that seems strange, especially when we're talking about them having decreased strength and decreased mobility to do those things. But sometimes where there's a will, there's a way. And so we want to make sure those large furniture pieces are secured so that they're not tipping over if the resident is trying to move it. It's just interacting with it in a strange way. Maybe falls, God forbid they lose their balance and they stumble into the entertainment center, and then the television falls forward on top of them and makes the situation worse, that kind of thing. We also want to be mindful of glass furniture or lots of knickknacks. So by all means, we want to keep the home homey. Knickknacks, picture frames, those things are all part of that process. But we might want to limit where they are placed so that they're not on, tables in the middle of the room, like coffee tables, end tables, things like that, and keep them more relegated to the edges of the room, like on shelves. Reduce them if there are things that are maybe less sentimental for our loved one that we can remove without it being too obtrusive on their environment. Just because those are things that might fall, that might break, that might hurt them, if they get knocked over, kind of a thing. And glass furniture. I have seen residents take a tumble and go through that china cabinet. And what would be, a bump on the noggin, which is of course a bad thing, then becomes a bump on the noggin and a lot of cuts. And if our loved one is on blood thinners, it's a whole nother ballgame. It's a big problem. My own grandfather, towards the end of his life, stumbled and fell through his glass coffee table, and took down the coffee table and himself and everything that was on it with him. And fortunately, he sustained only minor injuries, but that could have been a terrible situation. And especially in the moment when it happened, when we weren't sure how bad the injuries were, it was a terrible situation. So if there's a lot of glass furniture, even if there's just a lot of furniture, you might want to think about paring that down, replacing it with less fragile options, or moving it to less high traffic areas to reduce that risk. If we are using pendants and emergency call systems, so like, the life alert pendant, things like that, we want to make sure that we're checking them regularly and updating the information on those regularly to reflect our loved one's actual needs. I think most of them recommend testing somewhere from every 1 to 3 months. So make sure we're staying on top of that. Set reminders for yourself to do it, whatever you need to do. We also want to make sure that we're doing regular practice with our loved one on how to use those. So if your loved one has a life alert pendant, that necklace with the button that they can push and it connects them to somebody who's going to call 911 and get them help, that pendant doesn't do them any good if they don't know to press that button. And so depending on where your loved one's memory is, you may need to practice that skill anywhere from monthly to weekly to daily. And realistically, there may be a time when our loved one is not able to do that. And there are some that have automated call options. There are some that have either GPS chips in them or that have, I'm going to say a modified version of an altimeter, which like measures height. So if your loved one normally wears it on their neck or on their wrist, and suddenly it quickly goes from here to here, it's interpreting that as a fall and it's going to automatically call for help. We might want to look into options like that, especially if our loved one isn't aware enough to be able to push the button when they need help. If your loved one is more independent, is in earlier stages of dementia, sometimes we have situations where they're like, I don't need to wear that. I'm fine. I've got it under control. We want to make sure that we're stressing for them that nobody plans for accidents to happen. I have seen residents have this argument with their children, and then when they fall, it's one of those I told you so moments, and or they're recognizing for themselves, you're right, I wish I had been wearing it. I've been sitting on the floor for 2 hours, kind of a thing. So making sure that we're stressing that with them. And we want to make sure, especially if our loved ones are in the more advanced, more moderate or advanced stages of dementia, any of those systems that have a verbal prompting, whether that's that it plays a sound or it plays a message on its own, or whether it connects to a person on the other end of a speaker that's talking to our loved one, they may or may not be able to understand what that voice is, what it's saying, where it's coming from, and may or may not be able to respond to that. And if that's the case, again, we want to look at those automated options or evaluate whether that's the right tool for us and see what other options are available. And so some hidden hazards. These are not necessarily all hidden. Some of them are pretty self-explanatory, but some of them are things that we don't necessarily think of. So we want to make sure that we're regularly checking smoke detectors and carbon monoxide detectors, especially if our loved one lives alone or has a lot of alone time during the day. Maybe you're still working and they're okay while you're at work, but we want to make sure these devices work, their batteries are charged, all of that stuff. And again, setting reminders to make sure we're staying on top of this. Some people time it with daylight savings time every year so that it's like an automatic routine, whatever works for you. We want to limit access to cleaning products and make sure that any cleaning products we do give them access to are non-toxic. Just, like it could be anything from maybe they drink the bleach to maybe they're just in an enclosed room with it and the fumes are really bad for them, kind of a thing. So we want to limit those options. I have unfortunately seen residents who will, pour a little bit of bleach or a little bit of laundry detergent into a cup with the intent to spot treat a stain, and then later forget that that was bleach or laundry detergent in that cup and come back and drink it. So things like that. So we want to make sure we limit their access. And that we're using non-toxic options so that if they ingest it, worst case scenario, it just gives them a little tummy trouble, but that's manageable and not necessarily harmful. We want to make sure that we are keeping cleaning products in the original packaging. So if you are that super organized person that has pretty containers for everything, cleaning products really should stay in the original packaging so that they A, look like cleaning products, and B, have the warning labels and the what to do in case your loved one ingests it, accessible in case the worst should happen. If you're leaving cleaning products accessible, you may want to put large print labels on them that say exactly what they do, what they're for, what to do if they get in your eyes and your nose and your mouth, that sort of thing. We want to keep those messages short and clear so that they're able to understand what they say as their dementia progresses. And we want to be mindful of things like aerosol sprays and cleaning wipes. These are things that our loved ones can safely use in the early stages of dementia. But I have unfortunately seen residents who will take a cleaning wipe, like a Lysol wipe, a disinfecting wipe, and mistake it for a washcloth. And now they're using it on their face, on their genitals, on their sensitive skin, and creating burns, creating, rashes and things like that that are a problem. Same with aerosol cans. Maybe they've always used that, Febreze or that Lysol in the bathroom, but suddenly they're mistaking it for hairspray or for deodorant. And again, that's not a safe use for it, and it's having complications. We want to keep medications locked up, and that includes over-the-counter medications. Even things that seem harmless can become hazardous quickly. Even things like things we think of as universally safe, Tums, Tylenol, become toxic really quickly. If we exceed the dosage of Tylenol recommended for a day consistently, it can cause liver failure. And if your loved one has a headache and takes 2 Tylenol, and it takes that Tylenol 20, 30 minutes to kick in, and 10 minutes later, they're like, oh, I have a headache. And they take 2 more. And 5 minutes later, they're like, oh, I have a headache, and take 2 more. They've now taken 6 in the span of 20, 25 minutes. And that's a problem. And especially if you don't know they've done that, maybe they tell you they have a headache and you're giving them 2 more. Now they're really, in a pickle. Tums 4 or 6, I think, is the maximum daily recommended dosage before they start to have negative impacts on kidneys. And that's the case for a lot of over-the-counter medications, that they have thresholds, maximum thresholds for dosing for safety reasons. And if our loved one is going to take it and forget they've taken it and take it again and not self-regulate, that's a problem. Unfortunately, I think I've only had this experience once, but I did have an experience once where a family member thought they were being helpful and gave their loved one a bottle of Tylenol, not realizing that we were already giving that person the maximum daily dose of Tylenol that was recommended for them by their doctor. And one time they gave their loved one a fresh bottle that morning. And when we found it in their room that afternoon, 28 pills were already missing. And that's in addition to the doses that we were giving them in accordance with their doctor's orders. Fortunately, that person was okay, but that could have been a really tragic situation. So definitely keep those medications locked up and out of reach. We want to leave frequently used items visible. So if your loved one is using certain things every day, we want to make sure they know exactly where to find it. We want to have that visual cue of leaving it out on a surface that's easily accessible to them, so that they're not rummaging through high or low cabinets looking for it, which again, just like we talked about in bedroom safety, increases the chances they're going to tumble, they're going to drop something on their head, they're going to climb on something to try to reach something better, that sort of thing. We want to limit access to large household tools and appliances. This probably sounds self-explanatory, but especially as our loved one gets weaker, maybe they used to vacuum every day, but the vacuum might make them more prone to falls now. We don't necessarily want them operating a lawnmower, a weed whacker, things like that. So we want to limit access to those things. We want to leave spaces for safe rummaging. Okay. Sometimes our loved ones with dementia get a little restless. They like to look through things, to sort things. It helps them feel productive and busy. We want to make safe opportunities for them to do that. So if your loved one always managed the bills, you might want to keep a few outdated bills. They don't know the date. They won't recognize that it's outdated. Keep a few outdated bills or important looking mail in, a basket or a specified area on a shelf, so that they can root through that pile and feel productive. Maybe you give them an old check register or a blank check register so that they can feel as though they're still doing those things and have that sense of fulfillment. If dad was a really handy guy, maybe you leave a toolbox accessible and you're going to take out the dangerous things, the nails, the screws, the screwdrivers, but you can leave like a hammer, a wrench, some things so that he can root through his toolbox. Maybe you leave a small woodworking project that he's able to do safely nearby or something so that he has that opportunity for engagement and that sense of fulfillment. Even if it's just sorting and organizing through the toolbox a couple times a day. Often that's enough for our loved ones. Another big one, photos, hobby supplies. If mom was a knitter or a crocheter, keep balls of yarn handy, keep skeins of yarn handy so that she can just, interact with it. Give her something to do to help keep that sense of personality and keep that sense of engagement. This is something that was always part of who she was, and now she can still do it, just in a different way. If she's still able to knit or crochet, by all means, leave the tools there available to do it. But if not, just the simple act of rolling yarn into a ball still creates that sense of engagement and fulfillment. And we want to be mindful of container use. So I mentioned this in our kitchen stage, but making sure that we're not putting non-food items in food containers, because that container, that glass, that plate, that Tupperware, whatever it is, signals the brain, this is food, or signals the brain, this is drink. And now our loved one is going to put that in their mouth if they're confused. And, is that a choking hazard? Is it a toxic risk if they're drinking, again, like the paint water, things like that. So just something to be mindful of. And so these are just some general suggestions. Of course, there are other things. If you have specific questions or a specific situation that applies to your loved one that you're looking for, how do I adapt this to make them safer and let them continue to be independent? Please, by all means, reach out to Pam Garofolo. She is our corporate director of Tapestries. She's my direct supervisor. She is a wealth of dementia education and experience. She is happy to be available to answer any questions you have, to walk you through any situations. And her email address is available here so that you can reach out to her if need be. Please do not hesitate to do so. Our next meeting next month will be about caregiver stress and self-care. Realistically, we spend a lot of time talking about our loved ones and thinking about our loved ones with dementia. And of course we do. But that also presents a lot of stress and strain for ourselves sometimes. And we are better able to take care of them when we ourselves are taken care of. So next month, we're going to take an opportunity to focus a little bit more on you and on what you can do to make sure you're in the best possible place to support your loved one and to feel supported yourself. So thank you so much for joining me today. I hope to see you next time, and have a lovely evening.